4 outlaws had Clara Callahan pinned in her own general store, demanding the ledger that could destroy them, until a young cowboy stepped through the door and said, "She's leaving with me." In that moment, Clara realized the war she'd been preparing for in secret was about to become very, very public. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comment section and what time it is right there. Then don't forget to subscribe to our channel to support the work we do here. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. The Wyoming sun hammered down on the dirt streets like a blacksmith's anvil, turning the afternoon air thick and breathless. Inside Callahan's general store, Clara wiped the counter with mechanical precision, her hands steady despite the way her pulse had been climbing all morning. She'd felt them watching the building since dawn, 4 riders circling like vultures who'd finally spotted something dying. The door rattled open with more force than necessary. Clara didn't look up from counting the jars of preserved peaches. She knew who it was before their boots hit her floor. 4 men, dressed in trail dust, and the particular arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. They spread out across her store like an infection, fingers trailing over merchandise they had no intention of buying. The tallest one, a man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, stopped at the counter. "Mrs. Callahan, been meaning to have a word with you." "Store's open for business," Clara replied evenly. "If you're here to buy something, I'll take your money. If not, I'll ask you to leave." The scarred man smiled without warmth. "Oh, we're here for something, just not what you're selling." 2 of the others moved to flank her. The 4th positioned himself at the door, turning the lock with a deliberate click that echoed through the sudden silence. Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd prepared for this day. She'd just hoped it wouldn't come so soon. "You've been keeping records," the scarred man continued, leaning against her counter with false casualness. "Records that don't belong to you, records that could cause complications for certain businessmen." "I keep accounts of every transaction in this store," Clara said. "That's called running a business." His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, hard enough to hurt, firm enough to control. "Don't play stupid. You know exactly what we're talking about." Clara tried to pull back, but the 2 men on her flanks closed in. One knocked a display of canned goods to the floor with a crash that made her flinch. The other grabbed her other arm. They hauled her away from the counter, her boots scraping against the wooden floorboards as they dragged her toward the center of the store. "Where is it?" the scarred man demanded. "The ledger. The one your fool of a husband died hiding." Outside, the street remained empty. No one was coming. No one ever did when these men appeared. Then the door exploded inward. Not literally, but the force of the entrance might as well have blown it off its hinges. Sunlight flooded the dim interior, and a man's silhouette filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, backlit, like something out of a fever dream. He stepped inside with the kind of calm that only came from absolute certainty, spurs jingling softly against the floor. The 4 outlaws froze. Clara's breath caught. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 20s, with sharp features weathered by sun and circumstance. His hat sat low, shadowing eyes that swept the room with tactical precision. His hand hung loose near the holster at his hip. Not threatening, not yet, but the promise was clear as daylight. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made men listen. "You seem to have your hands on something that doesn't belong to you." The scarred man released Clara's wrist, but didn't step back. "This ain't your concern, stranger." 4 armed men dragging a woman across her own store. The cowboy's gaze settled on Clara, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or shared understanding of what was at stake. I'm making it my concern. He took another step forward, slow and deliberate. She's leaving with me. The words hung in the air like gunpowder waiting for a spark. Clara's mind raced. She didn't know this man, didn't recognize him from town or memory, but she recognized the look in his eyes, the look of someone who'd seen violence and wasn't afraid to meet it again. You have no idea what you're stepping into, the scarred man warned, his hand drifting toward his gun. I know exactly what I'm stepping into, the cowboy replied. His eyes never left Clara's face. Ma'am, do you want to stay here with these men, or would you prefer to walk out that door? It wasn't a rescue. It was an offer. A choice. Clara straightened, pulling her arms free from the slackened grips of her captors. She met the cowboy's gaze head-on. Reading the truth beneath his calm, this man wasn't here by accident. This was intentional, calculated. I'm done here, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She walked toward him, each step measured, refusing to run or cower. The four outlaws shifted, uncertain. The cowboy extended his hand, not as a romantic gesture, but as a partner offering support across dangerous ground. Clara took it. His grip was firm, calloused, and strangely reassuring. You're making a mistake, the scarred man called after them. Both of you. This isn't over. The cowboy paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. Tell your boss that if he wants to have a conversation with Mrs. Callahan, he can do it in broad daylight, in public, like civilized people. Then he guided Clara out into the brutal afternoon sun, leaving the four men standing in the wreckage of overturned canned goods and shattered intimidation. Clara's store fell silent behind them, but in her mind, the reckoning had only just begun. As Simon Robinson led her down the dusty street, Clara's mind wasn't on the immediate danger or the questions surely burning in both their minds. Instead, she found herself remembering the last time someone had stood between her and violence. Her husband, Thomas, 3 years ago. He'd been standing in almost the same spot when the accident happened, the one that wasn't an accident at all, the one that started all of this, the one that made her decide she would never be helpless again. Simon didn't speak until they'd rounded the corner behind the livery stable, out of sight from the store's windows. He released her hand but stayed close, and his body angled to shield her from the street. How long have you known they were coming? His voice was quiet, direct. Clara studied him, this stranger who'd inserted himself into her carefully laid plans. 3 years, since the day my husband died. She let the words settle between them, watching for his reaction. Most people flinched at the mention of Thomas's death. Simon just nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. The accident at the mill, he said. Not a question. It wasn't an accident. Clara's jaw tightened. Thomas found something. Records hidden in a shipment of lumber. Names, dates, transactions. Land seizures disguised as legal purchases. Weapons moved through legitimate freight. Payroll lists for men who didn't officially exist. She could still see Thomas that night. Lamplight flickering across the ledger spread on their kitchen table. His face had been pale, hands trembling as he traced the columns of damning evidence. Clara, this goes all the way to the territorial governor. If we expose this... They'd killed him 2 days later. A tragic accident, crushed beneath lumber that had mysteriously broken free from its moorings. The sheriff had called it negligence. The town had called it God's will. Clara had called it murder. He hid the original before they found him, Clara continued, but he'd already started copying it. I've spent 3 years finishing what he began, documenting every transaction, every name, every crime they thought they'd buried. Simon's expression hardened. And you kept the store running, kept serving them, kept smiling while they bought their coffee and tobacco. I kept watching. Clara's voice turned sharp. Do you know how much information passes through a general store? Who's buying ammunition? Who's ordering supplies for 30 men when they claim to employ 10? Who pays in cash that still smells like someone else's safe? She'd made herself invisible. The harmless widow, too grief-stricken to be dangerous. They'd underestimated her completely. Where's the ledger now? Simon asked. Copied and hidden in 3 locations. If anything happens to me, letters go out to newspapers in Cheyenne, Denver, and San Francisco. Clara met his eyes. I'm not a victim waiting to be saved, Mr. Robinson. I'm a woman who's been preparing for war. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Then you know you can't stay here unprotected, he said. They'll come back tonight, and next time they won't bother with threats. Clara had known this moment would arrive eventually. The moment when silence became more dangerous than speaking. When hiding became impossible. I've been waiting for this day, she admitted, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. I just didn't expect my ally to walk through the door exactly when I needed him. Simon's hand drifted to his gun belt, an unconscious gesture that told Clara more about his past than words could. Ma'am, he said quietly, I'm not sure ally is the right word for what I am. Simon had been standing outside Callahan's general store for 20 minutes before the Outlaws arrived. Not hiding, just watching, remembering. He'd ridden with 2 of those men 5 years ago. Different names back then, different faces in the mirror. They'd called him Flint in those days, a nickname earned for the cold way he'd handled a gun. He'd been 24 and stupid, convinced that the syndicate's money could wash away the poverty of his childhood. The work had seemed simple enough. Move freight, intimidate squatters, enforce collection. He'd told himself the people they targeted deserved it. Then came the Mitchells. The memory hit him like a fist. A homesteader family, parents and 3 children lined up outside their cabin. The father begging, the mother clutching her youngest. The order had come down from the same men now threatening Clara. Make an example. Show the territory what happens to those who resist. Simon had stood there, 26 years old, gun in hand, watching his partner put bullets in innocent people over a land dispute that could have been resolved with a judge's signature. He'd deserted that night, rode until his horse collapsed, then walked until his boots fell apart, changed his name, changed his life, but he'd never stopped running from what he'd witnessed, until 3 months ago, when he'd heard the syndicate was operating in Wyoming again, using the same tactics, destroying more families. This time, he came back. In the store, the scarred man, Decker, had recognized him despite the years. Simon had seen it in his eyes, the flicker of confusion followed by calculation. Decker was deciding whether to expose him, weighing the tactical advantage against immediate survival. Now, walking beside Clara through the alley behind her store, Simon felt the old guilt warring with new purpose. You know them, Clara said, not a question. Simon stopped walking. I rode with them. Different operation, same methods. I saw what they do to people who stand in their way. He expected disgust, rejection. Instead, Clara's expression sharpened with understanding. That's why you came back. I ran once. Left people to die because I was too much of a coward to stand against men I'd called brothers. Simon's voice went rough. I won't make that mistake again. Clara studied him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to strip away pretense. You're not the man you were 5 years ago. Neither are you the helpless widow they think you are. Simon held her gaze. We both know how this ends if we don't fight. Then we fight, Clara said simply. Simon felt something settle in his chest, a choice made, a line crossed. I'm not leaving. Not this time, not until this is finished. Good, Clara replied, because I'm going to need someone who knows how they think. For the first time in 5 years, Simon Robinson stopped running. Sheriff Wade Thornton arrived at Clara's store an hour after the confrontation, his badge catching the afternoon light like a promise he'd stopped keeping years ago. He was a heavy-set man with a politician's smile and eyes that never quite met yours directly. Heard there was some trouble here, Clara, he said, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. You all right? Clara arranged canned goods on the shelf, her movements deliberate. 4 men tried to drag me out of my own store, Wade. I'd say that qualifies as trouble. Now. His tone turned soothing, patronizing. Boys from out of town get rowdy sometimes. Probably just had too much to drink. It was 2 in the afternoon, and they were asking about records. Clara watched his face carefully. Business records, the kind that might interest certain people. Something flickered behind the sheriff's affable expression, calculation, fear, maybe both. What kind of records would that be? The kind my husband was keeping before his accident. Clara let the word hang between them, sharp as a blade. Thornton's jaw tightened. Thomas's death was investigated. Ruled accidental. You need to let that go, Clara, for your own good. There it was. Not concern, warning. For my own good, Clara repeated slowly. Or for someone else's. The sheriff's hand moved to his gun belt, not threatening but territorial. You're overwrought. Understandable given the scare you had. But stirring up old business won't bring Thomas back. It'll only bring you trouble. Simon appeared in the doorway behind Thornton, silent as smoke. The sheriff noticed Clara's gaze shift and turned, his whole body going rigid. Sheriff, Simon said evenly. And you are? Passing through. Happened to be here when your town's upstanding citizens decided to assault a woman. Thornton's expression hardened. I'll need you to come by my office. Give a statement. I don't think so, Simon replied. Seems like statements have a way of disappearing in this town. After the sheriff left, his parting words another thinly veiled warning, Clara locked the door and moved to the back room. Simon followed, keeping watch at the window. He's bought, Simon confirmed. Probably has been for years. Clara nodded. Already pulling loose floorboards to retrieve 1 copy of the ledger. I'm moving these tonight. Church basement, the old homestead west of town, and with the telegraph operator's widow. Through the window she spotted 2 figures on horseback at the end of the street, watching, waiting. Simon saw them too. They're not even hiding anymore. Clara carefully wrapped the ledger in oilcloth, her hands steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. The sheriff was compromised. The law was a theater of protection with no substance behind it. The men who'd killed Thomas were circling closer, emboldened by official indifference. She'd known abstractly that she stood alone, but knowing and feeling were different things. Clara looked at Simon, this complicated man with blood on his past and conviction in his present. No safe authorities left, she said quietly. Just choices. Then we choose to fight, Simon replied. Clara secured the package. Yes, we do. Clara smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. She'd been awake for hours, sitting in Thomas's old chair with a rifle across her lap, watching shadows move beyond her curtains. Simon was positioned at the back window, motionless as stone, Neither had spoken since sundown. The acrid smell drifted through the floorboards first. Kerosene, deliberate and unmistakable. "They're lighting the house," Simon said, already moving. "We have 30 seconds, maybe less." Clara was on her feet, muscle memory overriding fear. She'd rehearsed this. Thomas had built the escape route years ago, back when he'd first understood the danger. She grabbed the leather satchel containing the master ledger and moved toward the kitchen. Outside, men's voices rose in coordination. Footsteps circled the house, front, sides, back. They'd positioned themselves to catch her when she ran. Smoke began curling through the walls. Simon yanked open the cellar door hidden beneath the kitchen rug, revealing narrow stairs descending into darkness. "Go. Now." Clara climbed down, Simon close behind. The underground passage smelled of earth and time, walls shored up with timber Thomas had carried piece by piece. It led 50 yards beyond the house, emerging in the equipment shed near the property line. Above them, wood began to crack and roar. Orange light flickered through gaps in the floorboards. They moved fast through the tunnel, Clara's breath coming hard. The satchel pressed against her chest. Behind her, Simon's boots struck packed earth with military precision. The exit ladder brought them up into the shed's false floor. Simon emerged first, gun drawn, scanning the darkness. Clara followed, gulping clean air that tasted like salvation. Then the shooting started. Muzzle flash lit the night. Someone had anticipated the escape route. Simon returned fire instantly. 3 sharp cracks that sent a figure stumbling backward. Clara dropped flat, ears ringing as bullets splintered wood above her head. "Stay down!" Simon's voice cut through the chaos. More gunfire. A man screamed. Simon moved like violence itself. Controlled, efficient, devastating. Clara watched through smoke-stung eyes as he put down 2 attackers with the cold precision of someone who'd done this before. A third man stumbled from the shadows, clutching his shoulder, gun falling from nerveless fingers. Simon kicked it away and pressed his barrel against the man's temple. "Who sent you?" Simon's voice was winter itself. The wounded outlaw, young, maybe 20, looked past Simon to Clara. Blood soaked his shirt. "You should have sold when you had the chance. Who sent you?" The man's face twisted with pain and something like regret. "Carlton. William Carlton. He runs everything. The syndicate, the land office, half the territorial government." Clara's blood went cold. She knew that name. It was written 17 times in her ledger. The man coughed, blood on his lips. "He says, you're already dead. Just don't know it yet." Simon pressed the gun harder. "Where is he?" But the outlaw's eyes rolled back, consciousness fading. Clara stepped forward, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Behind them, her house burned like a funeral pyre. Everything she'd built with Thomas turning to ash. "Carlton," she whispered. The architect, the monster behind the machine. She finally had a name for her enemy. They bound the wounded outlaw in the shed while Clara's house collapsed into embers behind them. His name was Danny Reeves, and pain was making him talkative. "Carlton owns the land office, the freight company, half the businesses in 3 counties. Danny's words came in gasps. "He's got judges, sheriffs, even territorial officials taking his money. You expose him, you expose them all." Simon crouched beside him, voice level. "How many men does he have?" 20, maybe 30. Some legitimate ranch hands who don't ask questions. Others. Danny's eyes found Simon's face. "Others like you used to be, Flint." Clara's head snapped toward Simon. The air between them suddenly felt charged. Flint? She repeated quietly. Simon stood slowly, not meeting her eyes. That was my name, when I rode with them. The silence stretched like a blade being drawn. I was going to tell you, Simon continued, his voice rough. I rode with Carlton's operation 5 years ago. Different territory. Same methods. I witnessed things that... He stopped, jaw working. I saw them execute a family, parents, and 3 children, over a land dispute. Clara studied him, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed betrayal. But she'd learned to read men in 3 years of careful watching. Simon's guilt was real. So was his determination. And now you're here, she said. Making amends. Amends don't bring back the dead. Simon finally met her gaze. But stopping Carlton might save the living. Clara thought of Thomas, of the Mitchell family Simon had mentioned, of every person crushed beneath Carlton's machine. The ledger in her satchel suddenly felt heavier, more dangerous. If I release this, she said slowly, people will die. Carlton will make sure of it. If you don't release it, more people will die anyway. Simon's voice turned hard. Just slower, quieter. One family at a time. Clara looked at Danny, bleeding and broken, then at the ruins of her home, then at Simon, a man trying to outrun his past by facing it head-on. Silence had kept her alive for 3 years, but it had also kept Carlton's machine running, grinding up innocent people while she documented their destruction from behind her counter. Truth was a weapon. It was time to use it. We do this in daylight, Clara decided, in front of the whole town. Let everyone see what's been happening in the shadows. Simon nodded slowly. It'll be dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. Clara secured the satchel. At least this way, we choose the battlefield. Danny laughed bitterly from the floor. You're both dead. Carlton doesn't lose. Clara looked down at him, her expression hardening. He hasn't faced someone who has nothing left to lose. She turned to Simon. Tomorrow morning, Town Square. We bring the ledger, we bring Danny, and we tell the truth. And if Carlton sends everyone he has, then we make sure the truth survives us. Simon extended his hand, not as a rescuer this time, but as an equal partner in what might be their final fight. Clara took it. Dawn was only hours away. Clara walked into the town square as the sun broke over the eastern ridge, the ledger clutched against her chest like a shield. Simon walked beside her, rifle in hand. Behind them, Danny Reeves stumbled forward, wrists bound, his blood-soaked shirt testimony to the night's violence. By the time they reached the center of town, a crowd had gathered. Shopkeepers, ranchers, families, the curious and the complicit, drawn by the spectacle of a widow who should have stayed silent. Sheriff Thornton emerged from his office, hand on his gun. Clara, this has gone far enough. No, Wade. Clara's voice carried across the square. It hasn't gone nearly far enough. She opened the ledger. The morning air seemed to still as she began reading. Names first, businessmen, officials, men who sat in church pews on Sunday and counted blood money on Monday. Then transactions. Land seized through forged documents, freight shipments that concealed weapons, payroll lists for enforcers who terrorized families into submission. March 1882, Clara read. William Carlton orders the Mitchell family removed from homestead claim. 5 people executed. Payment, $200 per man. She looked up. Sheriff Thornton received $50 to file a false report. Thornton's face went white. That's a lie. My husband documented everything before you had him killed. Clara's voice cut like steel. The accident at the mill. You were paid $100 to rule it accidental. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, anger, recognition. Simon stepped forward. I witnessed the Mitchell murders. I rode with Carlton's men under the name Flint. His confession landed like a gunshot. I watched them execute children. I did nothing. I ran. He paused. I'm here now to tell you what I saw, what they're still doing. Danny Reeves, swaying but standing, spoke through gritted teeth. It's all true. Carlton runs everything. The land office, the freight companies, the law. Last night he ordered us to burn Mrs. Callahan alive. The crowd's murmur became a growl. Clara continued reading. More names, more crimes. The hardware store owner who fenced stolen goods. The bank manager who laundered money. The deputy who disappeared witnesses. With each name, the town's collective silence cracked further. A rancher pushed forward. Carlton took my brother's land. Claimed he owed debts that never existed. A woman's voice. My husband spoke against him. They found him in the river. More voices joined, years of suppressed fear transforming into fury. Sheriff Thornton backed toward his office. This is slander. This is truth, Clara said, and truth has teeth. Simon's rifle remained steady, covering the sheriff. Around them, the town was waking up, not to a new day, but to the reality they'd been living in. The syndicate's grip, so absolute in darkness, couldn't survive the light. Clara closed the ledger. William Carlton built his empire on our silence. I'm done being silent. The crowd roared its agreement. The retaliation came within hours. A messenger arrived on horseback, his face covered, and nailed a letter to what remained of Clara's store. The message was brief. You have 24 hours to recant, or everyone who stood with you dies. It was signed with Carlton's mark, a simple C that carried the weight of 30 men and infinite cruelty. By noon, 3 families had packed their wagons and left town. Clara watched them go from the church steps where she and Simon had taken refuge, her heart heavy but understanding. Fear was rational. Survival was not cowardice. But others stayed. The rancher, whose brother had lost his land. The widow whose husband had drowned under suspicious circumstances. Even Timothy, the young store clerk, showed up with his father's old rifle and a jaw set with determination. We're tired of being afraid, Timothy said simply. Sheriff Thornton was locked in his own jail cell by midday. The deputy who'd arrested him, a young man named Peters, who'd apparently been gathering his own evidence, now wearing the badge. It wouldn't hold forever, but it was a start. Clara's burned store became something else entirely, a rallying point. People brought supplies, information, stories they'd kept buried for years. The building was gone, but what it represented had only grown stronger. Simon stood watch on the church roof as the sun began its descent, his silhouette sharp against the sky. Clara climbed up to join him, moving carefully across the shingles. You should eat something, she said, offering dried meat and bread. So should you. But he took it, their fingers brushing briefly. The touch lingered longer than necessary. They sat in silence, watching the town prepare itself for whatever came next. After a moment, Simon spoke. 3 of Carlton's former men are in town. Saw them at the saloon. They recognized me. Will they come for you? Probably. His voice was matter of fact. I'm a deserter and a traitor. That's worse than being an enemy. Clara studied his profile. The weathered lines, the weight he carried, the determination that kept him standing despite everything. You could leave. Start over somewhere else. So could you. This is my home. Clara's voice was firm. Thomas is buried here. My life is here. I won't let Carlton take that from me. Simon turned to face her fully, and something passed between them, understanding, respect, and beneath it all, something deeper. Something neither was ready to name, but both felt. Then I'm staying too, he said quietly. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. Clara wanted to reach for his hand, to acknowledge what was building between them. But the timing felt wrong, or maybe too fragile for the violence that still waited. Thank you, she said instead, for coming back, for standing. Thank you for being worth standing for. Below them, the town moved with new purpose. People armed themselves, organized watches, planned defenses. The cost of standing would be high. Carlton wouldn't forgive. He wouldn't forget. But something had shifted. The town was no longer hiding. Neither was Clara. Carlton's men came at dawn 3 days later, but not with guns. They came with lawyers, warrants signed by judges in distant counties, threats of legal action that would tie up the town for years. It was a different kind of violence, more insidious, but no less real. Clara watched them from the steps of her rebuilt store, just a frame and walls for now, but standing. She held the ledger copies in a steel box, and beside her stood Simon, Deputy Peters, and a telegraph operator who'd already sent copies to newspapers in 4 territories. You can't stop what's already in motion, Clara told the lead attorney, a thin man with wire spectacles and Carlton's money in his pocket. The truth is out. It doesn't matter how many judges you buy. The attorney's smile was cold. Mr. Carlton is a patient man, Mrs. Callahan. He can wait. Can you? As long as it takes, Clara replied evenly. They left with threats, not bodies. It wasn't victory, but it was survival. 2 weeks later, Clara stood behind her new counter, serving customers who no longer avoided her eyes. The store smelled of fresh pine and possibility. Someone had carved Thomas's name into the doorframe, a memorial, a promise. Simon entered carrying lumber, his shirt sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. He'd taken to helping rebuild, his hands as skilled with a hammer as they were with a gun. He'd stopped talking about leaving. Heard from the territorial marshal, he said, setting down the wood. They're opening an investigation into Carlton's operations. Your ledger is evidence. Clara nodded. It would take years. Carlton was wealthy, connected, protected by layers of corruption. But the syndicate was exposed now, its actions scrutinized. That was something. You know he'll keep coming, Clara said quietly. I know. Simon met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet. But it was a declaration of something just as important. Commitment, partnership, chosen alliance. They'd both spent years running from their pasts. Now they were standing still, together. Clara extended her hand across the counter. Simon took it, their grip firm and equal. Partners? She asked. Partners, he confirmed. Outside, the Wyoming sun climbed higher, brutal and honest. The town moved around them, changed, wary, but no longer silent. Carlton's shadow still loomed, but it had lost its absolute power. Clara Callahan was no longer invisible. Simon Robinson was no longer running. And the general store stood open, its doors wide, light spilling across floorboards, that had witnessed violence and truth in equal measure. The danger wasn't gone. It might never be fully gone. But neither was their courage. Clara looked at Simon, then at the town beyond her windows. Her town, her home, her fight. "Let's get back to work," she said. Simon smiled, small but genuine. "Yes, ma'am." And they did. In a sun-blasted Wyoming town, where silence had been survival, one widow chose truth over safety. One cowboy chose redemption over running. Together, they proved that standing against darkness doesn't require perfection, only the courage to remain standing when it would be easier to fall. Drop a comment below with the time and place you're watching from. I want to know where this story found you, and if you believe some stories are worth staying for, hit that subscribe button. More tales of survival, sacrifice, and the courage it takes to stay are coming.